Peace, everyone. Welcome back to the Piper Carter podcast. Um, Again, we're here with another segment of our very important Black August series, and we are very blessed and excited and inspired and looking forward to this incredible conversation with organizer, educator Lumumba Bandele of the Malcolm X Grassroots Project. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate you as well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think before we get into the interview and things like that, can let's just start up front with let's name the campaigns and how people can support. We'll start there. We'll probably name it one more time, but I want to just get
Ooh,
that
sure.
up front.
Sure. There are a few campaigns. So most of the work that I am currently doing now is around the support and release for U.S. held political prisoners. And so we just won a major victory with the release of Sundiata Acoli May 25th. The campaign now is in a fundraising stage. After doing almost 50 years in prison, he has come home, of course, in need at 85 years old. His daughter is now having to take care of an octogenarian. And so we really need to raise as much resources as possible so she does not have to bear that on her own. And so sundiataacolifc.org is the website. We encourage people and invite people to go to that website to see how you can support. You can make donations directly. You can purchase merchandise. You can get these T-shirts that say "We brought Sundiata home." You can get hats and pins. And so that is one. The other is matulushakur.com. We are inviting people to go there to be able to be directed to petitions where we are pressuring, urging, demanding that the Bureau of Prisons release Mutulu Shakur, who is terminally ill with cancer. His request for compassionate release has been denied twice. Even though he is, like I said, terminally ill, he will die. They will not allow him to die at home with his family with dignity. And so we are upping the ante and really pushing for more broader community support to support the call for him to be released immediately.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And the links we'll make sure are in the description. And when we send this out, we will continue on these campaigns with you. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So talk a little bit about the org. Before you, just a little bit about the org, so folks who are not familiar.
Sure. The Malcolm X Grassroots Movement is a national organization with chapters in New York, Philadelphia, D.C., Atlanta, Detroit, Birmingham, Jackson, Mississippi, and a few other cities I know I'm missing. And we are an organization for and by Black and African people in the United States fighting for self-determination for Black people, not only in the United States, but globally. And so I am a member of the New York chapter and have been since 1995. Wow.
That is 25 years, 23 years?
Yeah, it's 23 years.
23 years. Okay. That's a whole lifetime.
No, it's actually a little bit more than that. My math is horrible.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's someone's whole lifetime.
Yes. Yes.
And thank you for that. And can you let folks know how they can, get involved?
Sure. The Malcolm X Grassroots Movement's website is www.mxgm.org. mxgm.org. Malcolm X Grassroots Movement.org.
Okay.
And we are also on all of the platforms, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and you're invited and encouraged to follow us on those platforms.
Thank you. And again, just before we get into you personally, I want to just get a definition from you because there's a word. It's interesting. I'm involved in a lot of different ways in the movement, and one way is door knocking, and also just sharing information. And I was at an event on Saturday, and we are also working on a video that's going out about abolition. And
Mm,
as as I was going around the event, which is deeply into the hood, um, many people, and even those who had been formerly incarcerated, had never heard of the word abolition.
mm,
And so
mm.
I'm wondering, so because that word may get thrown around a lot in this
Absolutely.
conversation. So
Absolutely.
before we get into the conversation, could you please help us understand, what does this mean?
So abolition is, I think, in this current context, a way to frame a vision for for our society that is removed from context of punishment, that is removed from carceral reactions to human dynamics, that actually is the flip, where we can envision a space where we highlight the best of who we are. We make decisions based on preventing things. We make decisions based on providing as much support for human need as possible. And we recognize the ability for human transformation, that people are not the worst thing that they have ever done, that people do things in response to things, and we really are attempting to examine root causes of issues and begin to eliminate those things. And abolition, quite honestly, I think is, in its perfect definition, justice, meaning that we are attempting to right wrongs. We are attempting, in that process of righting wrong, again, not punishing people. We are attempting to create dialogue to help create understanding, but most importantly, prevention. Like, how do we prevent these things from happening? How do we make sure that we are creating a society where we see each other as humans? We see each other as valuable beings that all have the ability and a mandate to contribute to this beautiful society. And it may sound a little esoteric, right? But essentially, it is somewhat that. It's us trying to be the best of who we are and eliminating a lot and unlearning a lot of which we have inherited.
Thank you. And can you give us an understanding of your path to this work, and then an understanding of your work?
Okay. The easiest way to explain that, I am a child of the Black Power movement. My parents were founding members of an organization here in Brooklyn called the East. And I encourage people, if you have the opportunity, there's a documentary that was recently done this year on this organization. The first documentary that's ever been done on our organization is called "The Sun Rises in the East." It's a really powerful documentary. I encourage folks, when it comes to your city, to check it out. But my parents were founding members of the organization. They met there, they married there, and I was born into this movement, hence my name, Lumumba. And I joke around and say, well, there's no pressure, right? My father gave me this name, you know, it's not like I got a lot to live up to, right? So being born into the East, I didn't have a typical childhood. I don't know if people are familiar what it's like to be a child of the movement. And I guess it can exist on a broad range of ways and experiences. For me, our home was a part of the structure of Black organizing. My whole experience was a part of that. And so my childhood specifically was not one where I spent a lot of time going to playgrounds, going to play dates. Literally, most of my time was at my parents' side doing movement work. So doing boycotts, demonstrations, doing cultural events at our space, at the East, doing all of these things. And, my home was, a place where people would meet constantly. It was very rare that we had the house to ourselves. There was always people here. I tell a story oftentimes. I woke up one day and Nina Simone was in our living room and stayed with us for like about a weekend and some days, right?
Wow.
We had, South African exiles that came to live with us. So it really was a movement experience. And
Yes.
so that really set the trajectory for me, for how I saw my life, how I saw what my purpose was and is in life, and that has been the path ever since. So throughout my childhood, throughout my time as a youth, in high school, in college, I've always been doing some kind of organizing in some capacity. And I had some very impactful experiences as a child. At age 9, I had the opportunity to travel to Varadero, Cuba, where it was I forget what year it was, but it was an annual Cuban pioneer camp with young people from all over the world came to Cuba to fellowship and share space. And these are people who came from liberation movements from El Salvador, from Nicaragua, from South Africa, from Namibia, from Libya, from Palestine, from Ireland, all of these places. And we were representing the United States. And it was a transformative experience to be able to see young people living their lives, but committed to transforming the material conditions of their lives and their communities. But that's my childhood. Up until now, I'm still doing this because it is, again, my purpose.
Thank you. And then to your path to the organization.
The path to the organization was through the work. Malcolm X Grassroots Movement was the first organization that I joined that I did not help to start. I didn't co-found. And there were a number of reasons that I joined MXGM. Primarily in '94, I was doing a project when I was working at the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute. I was the director of programs then and was coordinating a African traditions and hip hop concert and conference. And we were pulling together young activists from all over, and I re-engaged with who is now my wife, Monifa Bandele, and we began to work together to pull this together. And then we also began to work together to pull together this Asabache Youth Organizers Training Conference. That was, I think, the key point where I became more connected to Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. MXGM was one of the key coordinators of this conference. And it's a funny story, and I'm going to share it because I think it's a real sort of anecdotal thing around organizational recruitment. I was going to visit different organizations trying to do a pitch to have them come and join the coordinating body of this conference and try to get them to be involved. And so I went to MXGM and spoke to them at their meeting, and I was asked to come back. And I came back the following week, and they said, asked me to come back again. I came back another week, and I was like, well, what's going on? And they said, well, since you keep been coming so long, why don't you just become a member? And they threw a membership application in my lap, and I became a member. And I was really impressed with the organization, primarily because this is the mid-'90s. And in the mid-'90s, there are a lot of community organizations, a lot of radical Black organizations that are, it's a lot. I mean, if you can think about what hip hop was during that time, right? It's Brand Nubian, it's X Clan. It's a reflection of like Black organizing, right?
Yeah.
And this was one of the first organizations I saw that had very skilled, resourceful people who were not satisfied with just rhetoric. And they actually were utilizing their skills and their expertise and their profession, in some cases, as a tool for the work. So MXGM had at that time a number of amazing writers. I'm a name drop. Some of the writers that were in the organization and at that time that like really wowed me: Dream Hampton, Kieran Mayo, Raquel Cepeda, a few others I'm missing, but these are all like significant, journalists, right? Who have transformed a lot around not just hip hop journalism, but Black experience in larger context.
Yeah.
They were utilizing their professions to talk about political prisons, to talk about theories of Black womanism, to talk about deconstructing patriarchy, to talk about Black self-determination, to talk about police violence. And for me, that was like enticing. It was like, yes, finally, some people that get it. And so I joined, and I've been with the organization since.
Thank you. So let's talk about the role of culture in the movement and in organize the power, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, I would say in my experiences, whether it's that same community in New York City, um, with hip hop, or again, South America, or just various, I would say, spaces where culture is central to the movement, or culture is central um, to the work of you know maybe mobilizing people, or igniting people, or educating people, inspiring people, bringing people in. I'm in some different spaces where we have mystica, right? Where we have a whole aspect where we, do stories and pour libations, or do dance or music or poetry before we start a meeting, right?
Mhm.
And it's to ground us in this
Right.
collective story of maybe our struggle or our triumph. Um, can you speak about how, for you, culture, how has that helped you? How has that moved you? How has that, given you wings, I should say, to
Right.
to do this work? Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna answer this in a certain sort of twist, with a twist, I guess, to your question, in that I maybe want to sort of say our arts as expression more than culture, only because culture in its true definition is a reflection of who we are, how we eat, how we live, how we sing, how we dance, how we pray, how we exist, right? Our aesthetics. And I think we oftentimes just lump arts into that, and sort of that takes over that. But culture is everything. So when I go walk outside my house and I speak with a certain linguistic style that reflects that I'm from Central Brooklyn, that's culture, right? Um, but the arts is a little bit different. That arts is when you get creative with that language, with that linguistic style, and you put it to music, or you put it to spoken word, or whatever. Um, but arts in itself, as a part of our culture, has always been a part of our movement. Like there has never been a separation, ever, right? Even if we're talking about pre-colonial, contact, with the European, our artistic expression has always been a part of our claiming our humanity, and also our self-determination and liberation, a vision for our liberation. So it's always been a part of that. So this idea of, like, using hip hop, as a way to talk about our movement, as a way to talk about our struggle, as a way to talk about our organizing, is not new, right? It may be new for that particular art form, but in terms of a form of engagement, a way of accessing people, it's not new at all. Negro spirituals underscore that, right? All of these other kinds of experiences, the whole Harlem Renaissance is that, right? We can't have this conversation and not talk about, like, Claude McKay's poems, "If We Must Die," and how that is a reflection of the anti-lynching movement, right? All of that, it's always been a part of our experience. And so what we're looking at contemporarily is this generation's manifestation of that, this generation's language and approach to that and relationship to that. And the next generation will have something different, right? But there will always be that connection, because when we struggle, we don't ever engage in movement separate from our art. It will always be a part of that.
And thank you for that distinction, or that nuance, or that,
Mhm.
I guess, breaking down of the relationship between the arts,
And culture, yeah.
culture, and
Mhm.
how. Yeah, thank you for that. I love that. May I borrow that? I'm gonna.
You absolutely should, yes. And let me
Yeah.
let me let me just say, I got that from the teaching of Dr. Marta Moreno Vega.
Mhm.
So if you're gonna borrow it, but that's where you got it from. Okay.
Thank you, and thank you. You are an educator, so thank you.
Yes.
Citing sources. Thank you. So let's understand about, at this moment, because in the beginning we spoke of, just a couple of the many existing campaigns. And can we speak a bit so that folks could understand? For me, when I'm speaking with a lot of different people who are not in movement or our culture, as you will,
Mhm.
I will say that it feels as though, or the language that I hear is a very hopeless language, a
Yeah,
very
yeah,
this thing is outside of me. There's nothing I can do about it.
yeah.
Could you please speak to power?
Ooh,
Um, and
yeah.
with that, I'm even trying to understand. Do I want to lump power and sovereignty together, or do we need to have? Is that two different?
No, I mean, I think
Okay.
power is good because I think power speaks directly to this. And I think if what I'm hearing you correctly say, it speaks to this issue of apathy. You know, this sense of hopelessness, and I think a lot of that really is a reflection of our, I don't say inability, but inconsistency with telling our stories. And again, this goes back to our art, right? We have as artists, and I consider myself an artist, I'm a DJ, like we have a responsibility to tell our stories, not only tell our stories of pain and suffering, but we absolutely have a mandate and a responsibility to tell our stories of victory. What happens is when we tell our stories of victory, people will begin to hear that we have won before. People will begin to hear that we have done the impossible before. And that helps break down this apathy because generation after generation, people will say, police have always been kicking my ass.
Right.
Police have always been harassing us, right? We
Right.
always been poor. We always been getting horrible education. We always been getting horrible health care. What's to make this any different? What are you going to offer me
Yeah.
or for us that's going to make any of this change, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When we tell our stories of victory, we find out that those narratives have been disrupted with victories. Those narratives have been disrupted with pockets, with spaces where we have changed the needle. We have changed history in many cases, right? But if our folks don't know that, if our folks don't have an understanding as to the possibilities,
Yes.
then that apathy will totally uh, just eat up our community members. And as an organizer, apathy is one of our biggest opponents,
Yeah.
not necessarily the oppressor,
Right.
but apathy. You know,
Right.
as an organizer, you learn early on that your struggle is to win the hearts and minds of your people,
Right.
right? And what prohibits you from winning the hearts and minds of your people is that people don't see any possibility in what it is you're talking about. People don't see any any possible way of transforming or changing that reality. But when you begin to share history, when you begin to share stories of victories, then it's like, oh, okay, we absolutely can shift some things. We don't have to stay in this space of victimization. We don't have to stay in this space of just being just totally, you know, just drowning in all this stuff. That is empowering.
Yeah.
Telling our stories, particularly our stories of victories, is a mandate. It's a responsibility. It absolutely is a necessity.
Thank you for that. That's very much food and is very nutritious. So thank you. Thank you for that. That's powerful. And with that, you talked about transformational tools. And I'm wondering, in addition to um, the idea of culture, what are some of the practices, the transformational practices that that the collective we can do, whether they are programs or whether they are other organizations or whether they are, um, examples, models. Um, I want to share a little bit so that in this moment, it goes from what could be perceived as theory to here's
Practicing it.
boom, boom, boom. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
That's a good question. I appreciate that because I think oftentimes we believe that we actually need to go somewhere to figure out what we can utilize, how we can build up and train. One of the most effective tools, approaches rather, and frames that I have received as a child of an organizer and as an organizer myself is do what you can with what you have.
Mm.
Like we all have a certain set of, or one, if it's just one, skills, resources. Use what you have at your disposal for the betterment of community. If that's where your politics are, if you are a radical revolutionary, use what you have at your disposal for revolution. Right? We all have things that we can contribute. And this is important because this also helps to deconstruct what people think is the image of an organizer. This is, people think this is someone who has great oratory skills, someone who is, educated in institutions of higher learning, all of that. Absolutely not. Right? When we talk about some of the most effective organizers, we're talking about people coming out of the Fannie Lou Hamer tradition of organizing, right? Utilizing their particular skills, expertise for the betterment of the movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all have something. We all have something. There's something that you can do. And so I teach a community organizing class at City University of New York.
Mm.
And I share some anecdotal things so that people can understand how this actually can be valuable. As an organizer, you know a number of things early on in the game. One, you know that if you're going to try to pull people together to organize people, you got to be able to meet some of their needs. That means that you're typically talking to and attempting to organize and or support people who
Mm.
are
Mm.
impacted by a number of issues. So if you cannot help them provide some kind of answers for some of their immediate needs, what does that mean? Food. Like if you're going to have a meeting, you better have food there, right? Childcare. If you want to be able to meet with residents or tenants, have childcare, right? Transportation. The majority of who we're trying to organize are poor people who have to do all they can just to make ends meet. And so we have to be able to facilitate the challenges that they meet in order for them to actually come and be a part of this process. And so cooks are extremely valuable in organizing. People who do childcare are extremely valuable in organizing. If you got a car or van, that's extremely valuable in organizing. And so that's important to know. So we are clear that we all have different entry points that we can find a way to contribute in a meaningful way. Not in a real performative or symbolic way, but in a very meaningful way. If you're a carpenter, there's a million things you can do. If you're a visual artist, there's a million things you can do. If you're a performing artist, there's a million things, So not necessarily having to go recreate something, but starting with what you have. Starting with what you have in your own mind, in your own heart, your abilities. Starting there is the toolkit that we suggest that people utilize.
Thank you for affirming us all, and for mentioning Fannie Lou Hamer. I would consider myself of the Fannie Lou Hamer school,
Mhm.
and her, model is definitely one that I would say has been the most useful tool that I've used, and I want to take it back,
Mhm.
s- because we're gonna wrap, but I want to take it back to um, the conversation around detainment, incarceration, the carceral system,
Yeah.
and abolition. And I
Mhm.
wanna so I'll say this. One, I wanna have a understanding in this current context, 22, about how that looks. And then also at the tail end, if you can give us a reading, something to
Something
read.
something to read. Okay, yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Let me give you something to read first because the way my mind works, I will forget after I answer your
Okay.
question.
Okay.
A book that I have been assigning to my students is Becoming an Abolitionist by Derricka Purnell. And I think
Thank
this
you.
is extremely valuable. This is an extremely valuable text in that it is not something that is grounded in academia. It's not something that regurgitates a bunch of different theories. It is very much about a lived experience of someone who came from one particular set of experiences and framing, and through life was able to shift and see
Mm.
what needed to change, what needed to be evolved. And so the book starts with where most of us are, and I think that is believing this fallacy that for generations all of us, for the most part, have been taught to believe is true. And that fallacy is that police keep us safe.
Mhm.
Right, that is one of the biggest
Yeah.
lies that
Right.
we continue to perpetuate. Right, and so
Right.
she starts with that in terms of how and why we just habitually call 911 for things that have no real, function of 911. Like, we could actually be able to solve a lot of stuff if we sort of decoupled, human needs from law enforcement, from a very a habitual, again, kind of reaction of trying to put this in someone else's hands. So I would
Mhm.
strongly recommend that. And I would say also just that, we talked about the definition of abolition rather.
Mhm.
It's important to say, because I know and work with a lot of abolitionists. I
Okay.
don't identify myself as an abolitionist only because I'm still struggling through a lot of components of that.
Okay.
So I call myself an aspiring abolitionist. Like,
Okay.
at some point I'm gonna get there, right?
Okay.
That is where I'm attempting to go. Um, but it's important to know that with a lot of these theories that are being um, discussed within the context of abolition, many of these are not new.
Okay.
Many of these are practices that our communities have been utilizing for generations. For example, I think 10 years ago, there was a whole lot of discussion around restorative justice,
Mhm.
right? This whole idea, and it's been so intellectualized that it's like it's almost hard to recognize now, because everybody sort of made it into something that they wanted to reshape it as. But when we look at the principles and the concepts that are a part of restorative justice, root cause, accountability, prevention, um, community engagement and involvement. A lot of that is stuff that our communities, and not just Black communities, but you know, communities in general have utilized. For example, back in the day, if you were playing outside and you broke Miss Jenkins' window,
Mhm.
right? Typically, folks are gonna get together. You're gonna have to go and apologize to Miss Jenkins. You're gonna have to
Mhm.
figure out how to pay for her window or fix it somehow, but you have to address and confront what your actions resulted in, right? And if you couldn't do that, you actually end up with probably working to clean up Miss Jenkins' yard for the next few weeks or whatever. But there is some very systemic ways that our communities have resolved conflict
Mhm.
without law enforcement, have
Right.
resolved conflict in a way that is grounded in community. It
Right.
wasn't called restorative justice back then,
Right.
right? But it
Mhm.
existed. It
Yeah.
existed. And so I think it's important to know that the names are new. The names are very new, to some degree, but the concepts are things that we have already. We have these models. We have stories if you talk to your grandparents about it. And primarily because of segregation, we had to come up with solutions that did not involve law enforcement. We
Yeah.
had to come up with solutions, and sometimes that meant other institutions had to step in and facilitate stuff. So the reverend had a larger responsibility to resolve conflict. The teachers had a larger responsibility to engage people and help resolve conflict, right? All of those things I think are extremely valuable and absolutely necessary now.
Thank you for breaking that down. And so I want to, respect your time, but just before you go, I do have one more question, and it's like the piece that I'm always asked from my community members about how resolve may be a not the proper term, but I'm going to use resolve just in this moment. When there are harms that are outside of something that could be solved in a circle or in that kind of way, right? Like harms that are what some folks may call irreprehensible, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When there's a want for vengeance, right,
Right.
from whether that's
Right.
family members
Right.
or loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to understand from
Mm-hmm.
your perspective,
How do you
um,
respond to that? Yeah.
and it may not be an answer, or
Right.
maybe there
Right.
is.
Right. Well, I
Mhm.
think the first thing I do is acknowledge that what we know doesn't work is what we continue to do.
Yeah.
Right. So we know, we hear stories every day. We look at the news of some of the most, um, what was the word used, reprehensible acts that people have committed and continue to commit. And we know that the state has put in place things that they consider to be things to help prevent that. Right. Harsh, tough laws, harsh sentences, and to a large extent, things like the death penalty, right? And we know that those things have never prevented these things from happening again. I think the challenge around us imagining a new society, us imagining something different, is that oftentimes we believe that it's somebody else has the answer, and
Mm.
that's not the case. What we are missing is the collective imagination to really put our minds, our resources into figuring out what some of these answers are. But I think because it's something new, we are stuck with what we know. And what we know, unfortunately, again, has been proven not to work. The police do not keep us safe.
Right.
Harsh laws, harsh sentences do not prevent people from doing reprehensible stuff.
Right.
It does not, right? Texas has one of the highest rates of executions.
Mm.
You would think that if that theory were true, you would not have murders. You would
Right.
not have all of the acts that would result that in the sentences of capital punishment.
Right.
People know, right, that this
Yeah.
is what happens, but that does not prevent it. So I think it's important to really just name what we know does not work, right? And then really begin to have an honest conversation about what some possibilities are. And that is where I think we're going to find a lot of the real valuable nuggets.
Yeah.
And I think that is also where we're going to find so many ways that people can contribute who typically would think that they don't have anything to contribute. Our neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Young children, have a conversation with young children about what their vision, understanding of justice is. Oh my God, that's a valuable conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because many of them are young enough where their understanding of justice is not rooted in a carceral context, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I think that those kinds of conversations are extremely important, extremely valuable, and we need to have some honest conversations about what we know does not work, and that we have to challenge ourselves that we are not continuously upholding something because we cannot figure out another solution. And essentially, that's what we continue to do.
Yeah.
The question is, if not this, then what?
Yeah.
Right? And so that
Yeah.
really is the entree right there. If not this, then what? So unless we have an alternative, we're going to continue to do what's wrong. Right? That's not sound. That's not logical. Right? So essentially, we're just doing something until we can figure out something else. Because in our own honesty, we know what exists, again, does not work.
And thank you. Thank you for that. You make me think that probably September we need to focus on healing justice.
Ooh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love it.
Well, I am going to respect your time, and I appreciate all the time that you have given. I want to give you enough time to do
I
what you need to
appreciate
do to prepare yourself.
it. Okay, thanks.
And I appreciate, I definitely would love for folks to send me questions and, any follow-up, and, would definitely point you in the right direction. Before we go, could you please, just again, for those who just hopped on, because we are live, name again the
The
ways in
organization.
which folks
Yeah.
can support these existing campaigns?
Absolutely. So the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement website is www.mxgm.org. Again, we invite you to go to the website and see all that we're doing. The two campaigns that I want to uplift at the moment, right now, the most dire need right now is for Dr. Mutulu Shakur, who is serving over 3 decades in prison right now and is terminally ill with cancer. He will die. He will die within the next few months. This is based on the Bureau of Prisons assessment, but they yet continue to deny him compassionate release. They continue to deny him parole. He is not and has not been and had never was, quite honestly, a threat to society. But yet he is still being caged up and still not allowed to go home and die in dignity in the arms of his family. And so we invite you to go to MutuluShakur.com, 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 to sign the petition and share it out far and wide, and join the call for his immediate release. The other campaign is Sundiata Acoli, and this is a campaign that in our conversation just now of talking about victories, this is a victory. Sundiata spent close to 50 years in prison. He was told that he would never see the light of day, but May 25th, he walked out of prison. He walked out of prison May 25th after close to 50 years. And so he's 85 years old. And he is in need of support. He is home with his family, and his family now is his children now forced to take care of their children, and now their father, who is an octogenarian, who is ill with a significant amount of health challenges. And so we're asking for community to help pitch in so that the family can not bear the burden of all of this by themselves. And so Sundiata Acoli, FC.org, SUNDIATA ACOLI FC.org, Sundiata Acoli FC.org, to make a donation and to support our freedom fighter who came home this past May.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you again for your time and for this very brief education survey, if you will, of one of I would consider probably the most important issue of our time. And thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank you to your wife for the work that you're both doing, and to everyone at the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement and everyone in the movement. Just sending lots of love and appreciation to everyone that has been continuing with these campaigns, and sending so much love to the families of everyone that's impacted by this incredible issue. So, and then we just want to ask folks to please keep listening to Piper Carter podcast on the Detroit is Different podcast network. You can find us on pipercarterpodcast.com or detroitisdifferent.net. And again, we are on all of your social platforms. Be well. Peace.
Peace. Thank you.